Right now, somewhere on this planet, a gun is being fired. Not in a war, not in a movie. In real life, in the next couple of minutes, someone will pull a trigger and change another person's life forever. There are over 1 billion firearms in circulation today. That's one for roughly every 8 humans alive. Here's the part almost nobody knows. None of this was supposed to happen this way. The people who set this whole chain of events in motion weren't soldiers. They weren't even thinking about killing. They were chasing the exact opposite goal. They wanted to live forever, and they were being paid to find the recipe. Picture yourself in China, over 1,000 years ago, working as a court alchemist. Part chemist, part mystic. Fully obsessed. The emperor wants an elixir of immortality, and it's your job to find it. So you're in your workshop, combining substances, testing theories. Today's batch has 3 ingredients: a yellow mineral, some scorched wood, and a chalky white residue you scraped off a cave wall. You mix them, lean in to inspect the result, and the bowl detonates in your face. You survive, but you have no idea what you just stumbled into. That one accident is about to spend the next 1,000 years evolving, and every single improvement made to it will make it better at killing. You weren't the only one this happened to either. Alchemists across China kept blowing themselves up trying to crack the same formula, because the search for eternal life wasn't a side project. It was the single biggest research effort of the era, funded straight from the top, and it had a real cost. Multiple Chinese emperors are recorded to have died from drinking their own immortality potions, which were often loaded with toxic metals. But your particular mixture was something else entirely. The yellow mineral was sulfur. The scorched wood was ordinary charcoal. And that white residue was saltpeter, a mineral crust that naturally forms in damp caves, cellars, and old piles of animal waste. So yes, one of history's most consequential substances started with something scraped off dung. We actually know these accidents were happening because around the year 850 CE, someone finally wrote it down. Not as instructions, as a warning. The text describes hands catching fire, faces getting scorched, entire structures burning down. In other words, the very first written record of gunpowder in human history is essentially an alchemist begging his colleagues to knock it off. Here's the science behind why it behaved like that. Normal fire has to pull oxygen from the surrounding air, which takes time. That's why a log burns slowly. Saltpeter is different. It holds its own oxygen supply locked inside the crystal itself. So when it ignites, it doesn't need to wait for anything. The whole mixture combusts almost instantly, releasing a violent burst of expanding gas. Out in the open, that's just a flash and a bang. But seal that gas inside a container, and the pressure has nowhere to escape except through the weakest point, explosively. That single mechanism is the foundation of every firearm that has ever existed. They named this discovery Huoyao, fire medicine, because as far as they knew, it still belonged in the medicine cabinet, not the battlefield. For roughly 2 centuries, fire medicine stayed relatively tame. It powered fireworks, warning flares, and flaming arrows. Then, in 1132, during the siege of a Chinese city, defenders introduced something new. A bamboo tube packed with the powder, mounted on the end of a spear. Light it, and it sprayed fire at anyone climbing the walls. This weapon, the fire lance, was essentially a disposable flamethrower. Then came a discovery inside the discovery. Soldiers started stuffing scrap material into the tubes along with the powder. Broken pottery, bits of metal, small rocks, trying to make the weapon more destructive. What they noticed afterward changed everything. The flame itself barely traveled a few feet, but the debris flew much farther and caused far worse wounds. Nobody sat down and deliberately invented a projectile weapon. It emerged because junk packed into a tube turned out to be deadlier than fire. But there was a ceiling. Bamboo could only withstand so much pressure, pack in too much powder, and instead of firing, the tube would rupture in the user's hands. So craftsmen were given a new task: build a barrel that could survive the blast. They switched to bronze, and that single material change is the moment a flame-throwing spear became something we'd actually recognize as a gun. The oldest confirmed firearm on Earth still exists: a bronze tube unearthed in northern China, dated to 1288. No trigger, no handle, just a metal pipe with a hole for a fuse. Every rifle and pistol made since is, in a real sense, descended from that one object. The technology didn't stay contained to China for long. Mongol military campaigns carried it westward, and by 1326, it appears in a European manuscript for the first time. Europe scaled the idea up dramatically, mostly because European cities relied on massive stone walls that had kept invaders out for centuries. That defense collapsed in 1453 when Ottoman forces hauled an enormous bronze cannon, over 8 meters long, to the walls of Constantinople. Within 2 months, walls that had stood for 1,000 years came down. From that point forward, no fortress on the planet was truly safe again. Cannons dominated siege warfare, but armies still needed something portable, so the barrel shrank down into a handheld weapon. That created an odd new problem. To fire it, you had to press a burning cord into a small touch hole with one hand, meaning you were staring at the ignition point instead of your target. The matchlock mechanism solved that by using a spring-loaded arm to do the job automatically, freeing both hands and both eyes for aiming. But the burning cord was still a liability, useless in rain and visible at night. The wheellock fixed that using a spinning steel mechanism that struck sparks like a cigarette lighter. It worked beautifully. It was also so expensive to manufacture that only the wealthy could ever own one. The person who finally broke that cycle wasn't a military engineer. He was a Scottish clergyman, and his motivation was duck hunting. His flintlock produced a small flash in the firing pan a split second before the actual shot, and the ducks were reacting to that flash and diving to safety before the shot ever reached them. In 1807, he patented a new chemical compound that detonated on impact. No flash, no delay, no vulnerability to moisture. 600 years of rain-sabotaging gunpowder ended because a minister got tired of missing ducks. From there, the final piece came together fast. Gunmakers combined the impact-sensitive chemical, the powder charge, and the bullet into a single sealed brass case, the cartridge. Reloading dropped from 20 seconds to about 1, and once loading was instant, you could stack cartridges in a magazine, which is how you get the revolver, the repeating rifle, and eventually the modern firearm. So here's the entire arc, back to back. Alchemists chasing immortality accidentally created a substance that burns using its own trapped oxygen. That substance got strapped to a spear and turned into a flamethrower. The scrap material stuffed inside those tubes turned out to kill better than the fire did, so the projectile took over. Bamboo kept bursting, so the barrel became bronze, and bronze eventually scaled up into cannons that ended the era of the medieval fortress. Then it shrank back down into something a person could carry, and every flaw in that handheld version, poor aim, weather vulnerability, cost, reload speed, got solved one invention at a time, right up until a duck-hunting clergyman and a sealed brass case finished the job. Nobody was planning any of this from the start. Every gunshot you've ever heard, in real life, in a film, in a game, traces back to the same chemical reaction that first went off in an alchemist's mixing bowl centuries ago. The people who discovered it were trying to defeat death itself. Instead, They built its most efficient tool. And somewhere on Earth, right now, another one is about to go off.